when you run your own business, this is maybe an unpopular opinion, but I think it sometimes can be good to have worked in a big company previously, because you kind of get an idea for how business works. And maybe that's unpopular, like you do have to learn on your feet, but I think I'm grateful that I had that as a backup, like to my foundation of my skills, that I was able to learn that. And you know, a lot of what we've talked about is confidence, and maybe looking back it was more just that I wasn't as confident in myself, and I probably did have the skill set, but I enjoyed having that team to lead.
Hello everyone, and welcome back to the House Hack podcast. Delighted to have you listening in today. We're excited to be joined by Katie Lee today. Katie is a visual artist, founder and CEO of Not Your Babe, who is on a mission to lead the next generation of founders. We're going to be talking about developing your confidence as a young person, amongst a ton of other stuff. Katie, how are you?
I'm good. Thank you so much for having me on. This is very exciting.
Yeah, really exciting for us too. Really going to be a great episode. But I guess the first question after that intro, what does Not Your Babe do? Let's start with that.
Yeah, so we're a business focused on empowering, inspiring, and connecting female founders. So we do it through a series of online and in-person networking events, which are alternative networking events. So I basically started it because I started going to networking events as a creative, and one, found them quite boring, and two, was quite often the only woman in the room. So basically it started as just a way to connect other female creatives and boost people's confidence. So whereas normally when you hear the word networking event, you think of just a room of stiffs in suits with business cards shuffling around. We always do like speed networking, we do games, we did I even had like a drag queen come along to one of our brunches. Like we've done like all really weird, like different events that basically are aimed at breaking the ice, getting you to actually get out of your comfort zone and actually speak and build connections with people, rather than just trying to immediately get business out of that person. Because yeah, the way to build business is that you actually form those friendships and relationships, and then in the end you do support each other. So there's a lot of different things we do. It's hard to put it into one thing, but the main thing I guess is the events, and then from that we've built the community. So we now have a membership that means that you can connect with other female founders from across the country. We've got some in different countries as well. So yeah, it's just a support network for women in business, basically, is what we're aiming to do.
Fantastic. Yeah, and I think it's really powerful to see you really enacting that change that you want to see, that actually networking kind of sucks most of the time, and yeah, it's not about building relationships like you say, it's about selling, and it's about communicating what your product or service does. It's not about you, it's not about you as a person, it's not about where you're going, what you know is meaningful to you. And it really sounds as though that's the essence that you're capturing at your events. It's about people, yes, selling to people eventually, if there is that part of the community or part of providing that even as a skill to go out and network with others to create a business relationship. But then actually a sense that you're putting just a relationship first, right?
Yeah, like when you're talking about networking, like I honestly think that word has just become a bit taboo. Like the networking in itself just means building a network with other people, but it's come now to the stage where it means that you're going for the hard sell. And like I always try to think of my business relationships the same way you would any other relationship. Like if you go on a date with someone, you wouldn't walk into that date just trying to ram like everything that's great about you down the face. Like no, you'd exactly. Want to get to know them. Like you wouldn't. And I don't know why we do it differently in business relationships. Like the best business relationships I have, I can honestly say most of my customers have ended up being my friends, and like most of the membership, like we're at the stage where we're growing now, but like right at the beginning I can honestly say I knew them all personally, and that's how it should be, because they're the kind of customers and that's the kind of business that you want to build, where your customers are your biggest advocate and they're going to be pushing it for 100%. You, and if you're building those relationships, you know, you might not sell to them then and there, which if you're going into a networking event thinking you're going to sell your product straight away, you're doing it wrong, because no one likes a cold sell, unless it's like a glass of wine, maybe, then I'd be swayed.
Maybe.
But
Yeah.
yeah,
No, I love that. And I guess you started talking about it, but really, how, when you were first starting out, kind of what was the thing that you latched onto with entrepreneurship and kind of doing your own thing?
Yeah, so I studied fine art at uni, and then I graduated, and then was just completely lost with what to do and where to go. And obviously you guys, I'm sure this is huge for House Hack, because when you graduate, it's really difficult unless you're in a career or degree that is like medicine, you become a doctor, like law, you become a lawyer. Like there's no path for fine art. You can do lots of different things, you have a broad set of skills, but there's nowhere really that you want to put yourself. So I basically started freelancing because I applied to work in big corporate companies. Like I was desperate to work for Misguided as a like creative in their team, and or in fashion. So I started applying to all these jobs and I got knocked back from them. Then was applying for jobs that I was overqualified for. So I was just in the middle space where I wasn't really fitting in anywhere. So I basically started freelancing to try and build up the idea was to build up a portfolio and then reapply to these jobs that I'd been knocked back from. And as I started freelancing and building up that portfolio, I was like, why the hell am I doing this to build a portfolio for someone else when people are already paying me to do it now? This is awesome. So it was a complete accident, to be honest. I carried on down that journey and realized how much more I learned through doing that than I probably would. There's bonuses to both, but I learned so much so quickly from trying to do it on my own. You had to learn how to market yourself, you had to learn how to speak to people, how to price yourself, how to connect with other businesses, how to present yourself in a way where you're coming across that you already know what you're doing when you absolutely don't. And yeah, so that's where I kind of got bit by the entrepreneurship bug, because I realized how awesome it is to actually build something on your own, and every single thing that I was putting into that was helping it grow. So I started building up my own business part-time from when I first graduated, as I say, completely an accident. And then it's just built and built and built until eventually it took me about 3 years in the end to finally go full-time with it, because I was working in a management role at the same time. And I probably could have left sooner, but I felt I was gaining stuff from that management role that it didn't make sense to leave, if that makes sense.
Yeah. No, it does. Yeah.
So yeah, it's anyone who's doing it, it was a complete accident of just trying to build a portfolio. And then
yeah, it so often is, isn't it? It so often is that kind of organic, accidental thing where you fall into it or you start and then it just snowballs and snowballs. And I guess what the thing that you're differentiating between there is working in a business brackets for somebody else or working on your own business. So you're working on versus working in. And I guess having done both, what are your kind of takeaways from that difference? Is it something that you really have a different mindset around, or is it applying the same skills just in a different way, or maybe you benefit differently?
Yeah, I think there's very different benefits to both. Like as I said, then I was still building my business part-time whilst working full-time store manager in Boots, and I wouldn't change that career path because I learned so much working in a big company where I had to learn how to do payroll and like do the budgets, do rotas and all like the admin side. And also in a big company you do get the bonuses of they've already got a lot of money behind them, so they throw a lot of like training and stuff at you. So but I basically reached the point where I was like, especially as a store manager, I was putting so much energy into that job and not really in the end getting that much back from it. And I just reached that natural point where I was like, I feel like I've got everything I can get out of Boots. Like I've learned everything I want to learn in that role. It's time for me to move on. So I think everyone, you find your own path with it. And some people love entrepreneurship straight away and want to go all in. I was in a position where I felt I was still learning a lot about management from already having a team of 30 people in that store. So I was like, this seems daft to leave when I can learn a lot about leadership from this role. But yeah, when you run your own business, this is maybe an unpopular opinion, but I think it sometimes can be good to have worked in a big company previously, because you kind of get an idea for how business works. And maybe that's unpopular, like you do have to learn on your feet, but I think I'm grateful that I had that as a backup, like to my foundation of my skills, that I was able to learn that. And you know, a lot of what we've talked about is confidence, and maybe looking back it was more just that I wasn't as confident in myself, and I probably did have the skill set, but I enjoyed having that team to lead. So I don't know if that actually answered the question. I've probably gone off on top.
No, it does. And I think what's interesting from your final comment there is what we've, I think, called the if then kind of conundrum of actually most people, and that's why I think it's not actually that controversial what you said, think that they need to get X in order to then have Y, and the Y is the thing they do themselves. It's their own business, their own venture, whatever. But X always changes, and actually, so therefore Y never exists in the first place. Whereas what you said quite naturally is that, yeah, hit learning plateau, different times, different places, and now I'm off. That's it. I'm doing my own thing, and that then has said, well, you've moved from X to Y because you've got the thing, you've got enough of a foundation, as you call it, rather than thinking actually the foundation just never ends and you get to a point where actually you stay in that one place. But like you mentioned, it's not about saying that one particular path, staying in a bigger organization, isn't for everyone. You know, it is for a lot of people, and that's fine. But yeah, the kind of learning curve is super interesting. I know Charlie's got a lot of thoughts on that from previous chats with him.
Yeah, no, I think the learning curve is really, really interesting. If like effectively you'll feel it as well when it gets there. So you almost come, and when you hit the point of diminishing returns to your time, i.e. you're not doing things the first time again, you're doing them for the third, fourth time, then it's hitting that repetition that if you keep doing, yes, you'll get a lot better at it, but also you won't learn as much as the first time you did it. So always trying to experience new things, I think is probably quite a big part of that journey as well. And I think having switched yourself, Katie, from being a leader internally to being a leader like externally with your own thing, like you must have made some pretty cool impact on people already throughout your journey. And is there someone or some experience that you've had that stands out to you?
Yeah, so like it's very different being a leader in like a big company, because you feel like you're not making, I know I made an impact on my team, but like I've gone now, and like to be honest, most of them have left, so maybe that's why, maybe they just love to be. But when I've started my own thing, when I did the very first networking event, there was a lady called Demi who came along to it, and she's like my favorite success story, because she's exactly what I'm trying to do with Not Your Babes. She came along to the first one. She was only 19, and she just started up her own business, and she was so shy, like wasn't really speaking, just sort of sat down next to the table and was just like not really speaking to anyone. So I just came up and like dragged her up, and I was like, right, we're gonna get you talking to people, like you're here for a reason, you've paid for your ticket, you're gonna get as much out today as you can. And we play like speed networking, so we got everyone playing the games. We're there for like 2 hours in the end, I think, and then we had a motivational speaker, and she left and she said, like, you know, thank you like so much, this has been amazing. And she's now been to every single event, like she's connected with all the community, she's had her business featured in the Liverpool Echo, like she's just like a different person, like she's so over the top, like her TikTok goes like viral, like she's just the most ridiculously extroverted person ever. And I look at that girl who came to that first event, and I'm like, they're two totally different people. And that's exactly what I'm trying to prove, is that the business model and everything that she had at the beginning, the actual business she was doing, it's called Fairy Tales and Fun Parties. So she basically dresses up as princesses and does like kids parties and stuff. But right at the beginning, the business model was exactly the same. And nothing has changed apart from her confidence in it. Like the thing she's talking about, she's selling exactly the same stuff, like a lot of the same characters, like just up leveled, but the way she is in herself and the way she presents herself now is amazing. And like she always says, she's like, well, I've got you to thank for it. And I'm like, well, you know, all I did was drag you up out of your seat at a brunch. But that's sometimes what people need. You just need that one person who's going to believe in you, and you're set then on your path. You start building your confidence, you start networking. So yeah, she's my little success story. But yeah.
No, that's really awesome. I'm sure you've got many, many more as well. But I think just having that one that stands out in your head is always really powerful to think back on. And there's moments where you doubt yourself and start thinking like, why am I doing this? Like, I don't know why I'm here. And then it's, I'm doing it because this person, because I know I can have that impact on someone as well, which is always a huge part of the journey and something that I definitely do myself as well. So definitely can relate, and seeing it through the feedback is the number one thing. And I think there's probably another thought here of like, you can help them go from 0 to 1, and then they'll credit you with going from 1 to 10 because you help them start. They'll take you on that journey as well, which is really, really cool. And with that, I guess we're talking about confidence here, but to kind of segue into it, like with yourself, Katie, do you still doubt yourself in decision making? And if so, when you come across those moments of doubt, how do you mitigate against them?
100%. I think everyone doubts themselves, and anyone who says they don't is a liar. You just get better, I think, at shutting that voice off more. So the thoughts that pop up are the same thoughts that popped up right at the beginning when I first started. And like you say, like having those like pivotal moments, whether it's a customer, whether it's a brand that you've worked with, whether it's like, it can be anything. Your success story is going to be different for you, but having those pivotal moments in your mind when you have those moments of doubt and just reflecting back on them and being like, right, this is what I'm doing it for. So I regularly, pretty much daily, I journal. So, and in that question, like I write down 3 questions, and it's always, what am I doing this for? Where am I going? And what do I need to focus on? And I do that every single day. And the where am I going is a really big one, because it just makes me reflect on, am I still doing what I want to do? Like, am I still going in the right direction? And is it actually aligned with me? And that's another really good question to ask yourself is, am I doing this for me, or am I doing this for someone else? Because if you start to get to the point where you're doing it for someone else, you will feel physically that unalignment. And those questions of like doubting, it's always trying to question if it's you're doubting because you're doubting your own skills, or you're doubting it because you're doubting it's the right direction. If you're doubting it because it's the right direction, that's obviously something you need to nip in the bud and pivot or like readjust. If you're doubting your skill set, like that's just a negative thought pattern. That's not true. And there's that, it's so cliche, but like there's that thing that's like your thoughts create your reality, but it is really true. Like if you think you're not capable of something, then you're probably not going to be. Like if you think you can do something, doesn't matter what anyone else says, they might say it's rubbish, but you've done it. Like you think you've done it, so you've done it. That's essentially what that saying is. Like if you think you can or you can't, it's true. So I still definitely have those feelings of doubts, but I make a point of just writing them down, whether it's in a journal, whether it's in notes on your phone, and then just try and push them to one side. And the majority of them aren't true anyway. And if any come up that are like physical manifestations, like not being able to, like you're not going in the right direction, or like I said before, then you can put actions in place to deal with those. But yeah, it's just training yourself more to shut them down quicker, so that you don't latch on them, and acknowledging that they are just thoughts and that's all they are.
Yeah, and I think that's really powerful. Is the key part of separating yourself from your thoughts. You are not your thoughts. You are merely the observer of them. I think that's really, really key as well. And I guess in comparison, or in the opposite case, what does it then mean to be confident in yourself? Like, is confident an expression? Is confident a belief? Like, what does that actually mean to you, and what does it mean to others?
I think it's a belief, because you can be very competent at something and not confident in it. So I've seen some people who are seriously talented, but they're not confident in themselves, so they're not going to go far. I don't want that to sound harsh, but if you don't believe you're going to go far, you won't. And then there's people who I've seen who are really awful at stuff. So for example, there's this guy who plays a tennis racket in Liverpool. Like, he just stands and holds a tennis racket and sings, right? I'm going somewhere with this. He's so confident, like, he's singing and he's horrendously bad, but he's owning that street. Like, he thinks he's amazing, so he's just going for it. Whereas there's actual really talented musicians who are just sat in their room, not recording and not sharing their music because they're too nervous that they're not going to be good enough. And I'm like, he's wailing like a bag of cats against the wall with his tennis racket, and he's got an audience of every single person walking down that main street in Liverpool, and you're sat at home with your amazing voice, not even able to press record on that button. So it's just, I would say, a belief, and it's a belief that you have to consistently challenge. When we're talking about those thoughts and those negative thought patterns that come up, every thought that you have, you're like, well, why just start asking yourself, why do I think that? Why is that going to happen? So if you have a negative thought about I'm not good enough, then why? And then as you start to get deeper into those layers, just keep asking yourself why. And often you'll find there's like a deeper cause that's causing that thought that you've either not dealt with. So yeah, there's a lot of like inner work you have to do when you're trying to be a leader in your own business, because anything you're making a decision of, obviously it's a reflection of your business, but because you're the leader, you kind of can take it as a reflection on you as well. And when you're not confident in yourself, so there's I don't know if you've heard of Carrie Rose, but she's a like massive entrepreneur. She owns Rise at 7, and she put a post up last week saying that she wasn't feeling confident in herself. And the fact that she did that was amazing, because it doesn't matter how big you are, you consistently need to be challenging yourself on that level of confidence, because when you're not confident, your output is not as good, and it will fluctuate, and that's fine, but just constantly challenging yourself and checking in with yourself and like, how am I actually feeling today? What is the best action for today? Because you'll have some days where you're like, I could take on the world, I'm going to smash all these presentations, like everyone's going to sign up to be part of my business. Then you'll have other days where you're not 100% feeling that. So knowing how to prioritize your time, and if you're having a day where you're not feeling 100% confident, taking actions to minimize that. So if you know, right, I'm not feeling that confident today, I've got a massive presentation this afternoon, try and cancel it. And I don't mind, that probably sounds counterintuitive, but if you go into a space where you're not feeling 100% and then you get knocked back from that meeting, you're gonna continue down that path. So I probably like contradicted myself there, but it's really important to acknowledge if you're not feeling 100%, try and not to take as big a leap, because if you take a leap and you fall and you're already not feeling confident, you're going to fall further. Whereas if you take baby steps and build your confidence back up again, you're going to go into that meeting feeling so much more empowered. So yeah, there is no like big secret. You just need to be very in tune with your own thoughts and your own emotions, and have things in place that mean that you can deal with that when you're not feeling as confident. It's not a straight line. It's not like a big upwards thing of I've hit this goal, I'm super confident in myself. No matter who you are and where you are and what position and what title you've got, you will still have days where you're going to doubt yourself, and that's okay. So yeah.
No, it's a great perspective, and it's kind of the opposite of where I would go with that meeting one, right? Because like, I would push myself to go, okay, right, I'm going to take a breath, I'm going to prepare whatever I can, I'm going to go into that meeting, and what will be. And I know I'm going to be nervous, I know I'm not going to be at my most confident best before. That doesn't mean I can't get there, you know, during, before I start, whatever. And actually, again, it's that self-awareness, isn't it? Because for me, I would probably do that meeting, I'd probably do well because I've done the preparation, because I'm that kind of person. I won't try and wing things most of the time, at least. and I'll get there and I'll have actually then boosted my confidence after the fact, even after that initial nervousness. But yeah, that point of self-awareness kind of really drives that home. And your final comment reminded me of a concept that I think I first read in a book by Darren Brown called Happy, but I think it's a concept that covers a lot of different baselines. The concept is saying that when we are approaching our own confidence and our own happiness, our goal is not to make the peaks higher, because the troughs will always become lower. We want to create a higher baseline that we work from. And that's really, really interesting. And I think that's the point where we get lost a bit in terms of confidence, especially as young people going out there into the world, trying to build our careers, build our businesses, trying to create things for ourselves for the first time. We want to create moments that are those highest highs of all time, when actually I think the most beneficial perspective on an internal level, like you say, looking inward, is creating a higher baseline for ourselves day by day and compounding that upwards. So then, yeah, when the highs come, they're still high, but when the lows come, they're still low too. And having that higher immediate baseline of zero is going to be where we'll find that genuine confidence rather than that false confidence. And so I wonder how that concept plays when we think about the fake it till you make it kind of thing. You know, so you mentioned there that confidence and competence can lead to, you know, link together quite well. But is confidence that something that we really kind of get good at, I guess, or is that fake it till you make it just real? And actually, like, can we use that to get to that place that we want to be?
I think it's probably an element of both. Like when I've said there about, like, I think it's really interesting that we've got quite different views on the you know, when you said like going into a meeting and like going in, you know, you'll be confident, you'll smash it. I kind of think it's both. Like the self-awareness is the most important thing. So if you know that that you're gonna go into something, and like you said about the peaks and troughs, if you've set yourself a really big goal, sometimes if you're struggling with your confidence, that's the worst thing to do. If you set yourself a medium goal, achieve it, then you can go up the next level. So fake it till you make it, I think, does have an element of truth to it, in that you should always be maybe one step ahead of yourself rather than 5 steps ahead of yourself. Like if you go 5 steps ahead of yourself and you fall, or you're going to drop straight back down to like 3 steps behind. If you go 1 step ahead and you fall, you're still back at where you were and you've not dipped. It's 100% like anything else, building your confidence is a skill. And like even getting to know yourself, getting that self-awareness, taking like personality quizzes, taking time to meditate, like all these things, as much as they've become like a bit of a trending topic at the moment, they're so invaluable, because the only person really that is going to be able to boost your confidence is you. And if you're looking to external people for that, you're building on a foundation of sand. Like that's never going to work. You're never going to have that confidence from other people. Your confidence comes from yourself, and it's knowing that you're aligned with what you're doing. So fake it till you make it definitely does work to an extent, but just have that goal not set too ridiculously high. You can have big dreams, but when you're setting your goals, don't expect yourself to have achieved that dream by next week. You know, like it's gonna take a bit of time, and just have that big vision in your head that you're gonna get it, but take small incremental steps and give yourself actual time to get there, so that you do it successfully and you don't have that big moment where you're, you know, if you look at young celebrities who've got massive very early in their careers and then their career just completely drops. It's a steady process, and the most successful, the best way to be confident is just to do it gradually and make sure you're building that skill gradually, like you would learning a piano, like you would learning a book.
Yeah, no, I think that's a really interesting perspective, and I definitely like lean into Ryan's point a little bit from before of like this is almost of building it up slowly. Like as leaders, I often feel like we don't have a choice sometimes. Like there's not really the opportunity to do that. Like if I cancelled the meetings I was nervous for, I probably wouldn't have any meetings at all. So I feel like it's often the case of the ones where you are booked in and you are feeling nervous for going into it and you're feeling underconfident, then they're the ones that perhaps have the biggest opportunity to be confident about afterwards. Because the next time, after being conditioned to it, you're actually going to find it pretty normal. Of like, oh, now these client calls are just the next thing. But when I first did them, they were terrifying.
Yeah.
But if you avoid the terrifying the first time, surely you don't get past the issue of confidence because you're not actually exposed to the fear yet.
I think maybe when I've worded that, I've probably like put that across in the wrong way, because I do not advocate cancelling all meetings that you're nervous for. What I mean by that is if you know you're starting, I think maybe my point's more coming from like the mental health perspective rather than necessarily just confidence. So if you know that you're in a position where you're not feeling 100% yourself and it's going to impact your mental health very negatively, try and take steps to either to postpone it rather than I wouldn't cancel them, but just say like, look, can we do this at a later date? Because if you go into it when you're in a very vulnerable position already, that's not going to be good, because that's something that is so your confidence, your mental health when you're running a business, how you're feeling is massively the output. But that's what I mean, like when I'm saying it, I don't mean cancel them, but like try and just push yourself a little bit rather than just pushing yourself massively. Yeah, maybe I guess, yeah, I do agree with what you're saying to a certain extent, but I know myself, if I've not been in a great position and I've set myself a massive target and then I've not hit that target, and then the more you do that, you take that massive knock in your confidence. But maybe just putting things in place for when that happens, I think, is the most important thing. So maybe if you're not feeling yourself, you've got someone that you can talk to about that, or you've got a sort of backup plan if you're feeling like you're going to go into, essentially you don't want to go into a meeting and completely like mess it up and then not confidence. So having those foundations in place that mean when that happens, you don't take a huge dip.
Massive kind of hit. Yeah, it's that self-management, isn't it? I think that's the kind of key that we're coming across is it's how we manage ourselves in relation to our own mental health and how confidence links to that. So for some people, their confidence will actually be completely separate from their mental health. Whatever challenges they might face, it might actually be that their confidence is pretty much standard regardless. They might have the odd dip here and there, but it won't be as big as others might be. And I'd bring back the thought that someone mentioned earlier of the kind of difference between internal and external confidence, of how we get that validation. So an example of a great meeting is that external confidence booster, isn't it? Whereas that internal thing is that affirmation 2 seconds before you go in, saying, right, deep breath, I've got this. And so that kind of internal, external focus, I think, is where we can build confidence in and for ourselves without anyone else watching, without anyone else in the room. What do you do when there's no one else there to talk to support you? How do you support yourself in that time? And I think that's where it kind of reflects back to responsibility in a way. Or, maybe we are all responsible for our own confidence levels, at all times. Like a lot of people talk about radical responsibility and taking responsibility for everything that happens in your life, whether it's good or bad. And that's a very overwhelming concept, but it's also one that has the power to shift a lot of your different paradigms, because that's a crazy thing to think about, because then it puts you in the driving seat when actually often you're not. And certainly for me, that's where confidence can come into play, because if you're not in the driver's seat, then you're reliant on other people for that confidence in whatever way. But I wonder how you feel about that kind of interaction between responsibility and confidence.
What you said there, like 100% true. Like when you're saying you're responsible for your life at the end of the day, and like, yes, it's an overwhelming concept, but it's also just like freaking true. Like everything that happens in your life you are responsible for, because you're responsible for your reaction to that. So yeah, you, whether it's good, whether it's bad, is entirely up to your perception of it, I guess. And if you're in a space where I probably brought in like the mental health because it's something that I think is so important for everyone, and yes, you probably can be in a position where they're separate things, but it is naturally going to feed into each other. But taking that responsibility, whether it's for your mental health, whether it's for your confidence, whether it's for the meeting you're about to go into, just saying like, I am responsible for my life to yourself. It's so weird when you actually take that responsibility, because we kind of get caught up in like the day-to-day that you forget that like anything that's happening, anything that's going to happen is your responsibility. So if you wanted to go and work for yourself, if you wanted to go and move to a different country, if you wanted to go and walk into another meeting, you're entirely responsible for whether that happens, but you're also responsible for the consequence of if that doesn't happen. So when I talk about like postponing meetings and stuff, I only do that because I know, okay, if I go into that, that's not going to be a good consequence for me. I'm going to make sure that I put that in place. But that's because I'm at a level where I've built up my confidence to the point that I won't feel negatively if I miss that meeting or postpone that meeting. When I first started, I was postponing that meeting because I was nervous about it. Now it's like I'm postponing it because I know I'm not going to show up 100% and I want to show up.
You set that 100%. Boundary.
Yeah, and it's in my head. It's not that I'm nervous about speaking to clients. That's usually not the reason. I'm very confident now speaking to people, but I wasn't. Like when I first started, that's, again, it's a skill. Like I wouldn't even, like, even doing a podcast, when I first started the networking events, used to have like a crippling fear of public speaking. And you wouldn't know now because I've been on podcasts. I like always introduce at the beginning of the events, like you can't get me to shut up now. That's, again, now like I've taken responsibility for that. And like I knew I had a fear of public speaking. I also knew that I wanted to be in a position where I was empowering other people. So I've got to get past that. Like I can't empower people while I'm coming in like shaking like a leaf. That's just not going to work. And that's something that I've built myself up and that I'm really proud of. So like my proud achievements in my business that have happened and like that have built my confidence, they're not the big things that others would see, like working with the brands or like the clients. It's like the small things, like I've managed to speak in front of 10 people. One person's managed to leave like an awesome review. I've managed to have that impact on them. I've managed to actually put on that event, and even though like the first event sold out, one of the events I did, I think like 5 people came and it was meant to be like a 20 ticket event, but I still ran it because I was like, you know what, I'm just going to do it. 5 people is still 5 whole human beings that are going to feel awesome after it. So it's how you interpret it. And people at that event even said like, oh, it's such a shame that like people didn't come. And I was like, what do you mean? Like there's 5 people here. Like there's 5 whole humans who've come to this event.
Yeah,
like,
it's that perspective, isn't it?
Yeah. So
like you've chosen to take that reaction and to kind of move that in that direction. And you're right, like 5 people, even that by itself, like, if I had 5 people sat behind me now, that's a lot of people in the room. But I don't want to move on from that point of actually it's the small things that really, really matter, especially in entrepreneurship, because I think that's something that is not spoken about as founders or as people that engage with brands, is that a lot of entrepreneurs, once they become quote unquote successful, decide to have a very selective memory about how they got there. And yes, it's about creating a narrative for the purpose of creating a 2-minute introduction over a 20-year career and all of those things. I get it. But it's also very selective of, I was destined to be here. It was always going to happen, which in a way, yeah, maybe it was. You're a confident person. You've established that. I get it. But also they leave a lot of the smaller things out. Whenever they reflect on their careers or their journeys, they leave out the very, very first thing that they did, or they leave out the tiny thing that, that time they did cancel a meeting because they were nervous, and then they didn't do it again. They overcame like those tiny, tiny things. And I think people do it because they want to try and show that they're the only ones that could have done the thing that they did, because that's how they have become that confident person that's saying that story. Does that make sense? Because I think that's how, or partly how, entrepreneurs kind of differentiate themselves from another person who could have done the thing that they did, but actually no one else could and no one else did. And that's the kind of confident narrative that they then paint back for themselves as they think back on their own journeys. I don't know if that makes sense at all.
Yeah, I mean, there's a very big difference between like confidence and ego. And quite often entrepreneurs go into just their ego, which it's that need to, as you say, like stand out from the crowd, like only I could have done this, I'm really important, I matter, like all these things, which it's a human need to feel relevant and to feel like you're significant. But it's also so important to remember that you are one person on a tiny planet, and like make your impact in your circle. Like don't worry about if you're not making an impact on all these like amazing, like huge crowds. Like, yeah, you've got like 7 million people following you, like whatever. Like I've had an event where I've had 5 people who've gone away feeling awesome. Like that's the impact for me. And it's like you say, like having those moments of embracing the small wins, because they're not even small wins, they're completely perspective shift for you. And a lot of the time, I think when you see these, I look at a lot of entrepreneurs and a lot of people who do like talks and like go on podcast stuff, and I don't feel like they're confident, because if you're having to boost yourself up on all these like things that only I could have done this, and this is me, and this is how I've got there, that to me screams like insecurity, not confidence. That's you having to put your accolades to gain your confidence from them. And it's back to what we said before about the external internal validation. You're having to put all these things that make you special and make you stand out from the crowd, and actually they don't matter. And it's quite a morbid realization to have, is that you actually have that moment where you're like, okay, I don't actually matter. Like I'm just like one person on this huge planet. Like just do what is good for you, and like do the impact where you can. So like if you're not an amazing public speaker, that's fine, but maybe you're really good at writing, so just start writing. And yeah, that I don't think when you hear a lot of the big entrepreneurs and CEOs and stuff talking, that it's actually confidence. It's kind of that fake it till you make it thing, and it's that having the almost like the inflated, just like the peacock, like they've got their feathers showing, like this is how I've won, like this is how I'm great. And actually I think I have a lot more respect for the CEOs and entrepreneurs who do talk about the shit side of it, and like no, they didn't know what they were doing, no, it wasn't like a destined path, and that actually they're just human. And I have so much more respect and so much more connection when I hear those people talk, because it reminds you that actually we're not all that different, and we do have a lot of the same struggles no matter where you are in your career. So yeah, I think big companies need to start speaking about it more, so that the generation coming through don't feel isolated and have the sort of belief in themselves that, okay, they're just like me, I can do that too. Let's just give it a go. So yeah.
Yeah, I think I definitely agree with that. I think there's probably another thought that I bring into it as well, which is kind of something I've experienced personally, is that often the confidence can come from doing something else entirely. So that you might not be confident, say, at public speaking, or I'd say selling something, but previously you've got confident at a certain skill, and you can look back on that and be like, okay, I got better at that at time and I became good at it, so I know I can get good at this. And by applying the same thinking of I can get better, I think is really empowering for confidence, because it means that you're only at this point in the present, but in the future it can really change. And that's something that personally I bring into everything I do as well. Like the example for me is, in the past, going from starting as the worst at running in my running club and then becoming like top 10 UK under 23s, like that's quite a journey that I tell myself about and be like, okay, I learned I could become good at it by doing it. So I then apply that same thought process to everything else as well. Like I know I can get good at this, it just requires time. And thinking of people that are already good at it as not being like gods or like infallible. Like, no, they just have done it for a bit longer than yourself. I think that's really important as well. It's like distinguishing between where you want to be and where you are, and the steps to get there are really just about experience and about doing it multiple times, and then you'll get there in the end. That's what I think is really, really key.
It's like, yeah, comparing your level 5 to another's level 50 is not the same, you know. Yeah, it's really good perspective. Do you think that's about? Go on.
Oh no, I was just going to say I totally agree with what you said, because I think like the best skill you can ever learn is like learning how to learn. I know that sounds really weird, but like no matter what you're learning how to do, whether it's confidence, whether it's you're learning how to ride a bike, whether it's learning how to run a business, if you're comfortable with the process of learning, you're fine, because the process of learning does include those massive fuck ups and like massive moments where you're like, what am I doing? And it's not going to be a straight line. You are going to have moments where you completely mess it up, but being okay with that. And I think that's the best bit of advice I can give with confidence, is that it's not that you're going to actually be like, confidence isn't being competent, like I said before. It's just that you're confident in yourself, and you know that you can get through it because you have got through it before. Like you said, Charlie, with your running, you got to that point where you've just done it every day, and eventually you've smashed it. But even when you smashed it, you probably were like, oh well, that was an anticlimax, because you've just been doing it every day. So you've just got so used to doing it every day that you don't just have this sudden moment where you wake up and you're like, wow, I'm amazing. I think that's the same with entrepreneurship, and I think it's the same with confidence. It's a process, so you're not actually going to have that big elated feeling of like, oh my god, I've smashed it, I'm amazing at it now. Yes, you might do, but also you're probably by that point already used to that new level of confidence, so it doesn't feel as big of a overwhelming impact. You just gradually build it up. So
yeah, I think you don't make it, you live it.
Yeah.
So that every day you consistently get more and more used to it. So the point at which you feel like 5 years ago I've made it, by when I get there, actually it's just you living, which becomes really interesting when you look on it in the past perspective as well. And there's probably a really interesting differentiation here between, say, extroversion and confidence.
yes.
Because how were those two things in your mind different? Or are they in a few ways the same? Because someone can be introverted but still confident themselves, but another person can be extroverted and probably underconfident and maybe still expressed in their extroversion. So I don't know how that differs between personality types as well.
Yeah, I think it, like as I said, like confidence is just like knowing that, like just believing in yourself, really. Like, and I totally agree with what you said there, is that some of the really extroverted people aren't necessarily confident. Like it sometimes can come from a place of insecurity, that you're feeling the need to what's called like exhibitionist, where you're like larger than life, like I'm the biggest in the room kind of thing, and actually you're just very insecure in yourself, and you're taking that from a place of feeling insecure. So yeah, there's a massive difference between confidence and extroversion, because I know some people who are super quiet, and maybe that comes across as shy, but it's just that they are very in their own thoughts, and I don't see them as shy, because then when they do speak or they do talk about something, you can tell they're very confident. It's very different like aura around a person if they're confident versus like introversion and extroversion. And I think quite often you can tell if someone's just extroverted and very insecure, because they'll just, I don't know, I feel like now I can sense it. I can tell if someone's really confident in themselves, because they just seem really genuine. And that's, I think, what it comes down to, is if you're confident in yourself, you don't feel the need to like big yourself up or have all these other things. Like you'll just be really authentic, because you're very like confident in what you're saying. And it goes back to like being self-aware, is that is the key to being confident in yourself, is just getting to know yourself, because you'll be surprised how little you actually know yourself until you sit and take that time, whether it's through journaling, whether it's through meditation, whatever you actually want to do, that you probably don't know yourself very well at all. I think that's probably why the last year has been like mad for everyone, because we've had so much time to just be with ourselves and get to know what ticks our boxes, and learning about your personality type, and learning if you're someone who's extroverted and which situations are going to maybe help you grow and which situations are going to make you stagnate. And that is the key to, you should treat yourself how you treat a business, really. Like, it's either a yes or no to things. Like, it's either going to help you grow or it's going to help you stagnate. So like, just start treating yourself like you would a business, and just be a bit more like cutthroat with things. Yeah.
Nice. Yeah. No, try and be cutthroat in those decisions that you make for yourself. And I think part of that is the conviction part of confidence, isn't it? It's saying, actually, yes, I back myself to do X, Y, Z, or I back myself to believe X, Y, Z about myself. And I wonder if what we're coming towards as well is, on an individual level, trying to create maybe an ideal version of what confidence is for us, or, you know, sitting with the question, what does a 10 out of 10 confident me feel like and look like? And then visualizing that, sitting with it and actually answering that question in that moment, not necessarily what that is for 5 years down the line, which is, I think, part of the typical questioning of, you know, confidence is that destination you're going to get to. So do you think maybe that's what we should think about, is creating that ideal version of confidence for ourselves?
Yeah, I think so. I think what you said there about the destination is really important as well. Is like, we quite often treat everything, whether it's confidence or your business, like as a destination to get to. And you need to make sure that, yes, have that goal, but also just make sure you're checking in where you are right now, because you are probably a lot more confident right now than you were like 2 years ago or 5 years ago. And it all comes back to, yeah, self-awareness, just knowing what your triggers are, knowing what makes you happy, knowing what makes you feel alive, and like doing more stuff that makes you feel alive. It doesn't necessarily mean, you know, if we do it in a business context, like doing those meetings and stuff can seem really scary, but you know, afterwards you'll feel better. It's like going to the gym. Like, sometimes you'll feel like, oh my God, I 100% don't want to do this. But in your mind, you're like, okay, if I do this, I know I'll feel better after it. So knowing whether something is going to make you, it's very different between like feeling nervous and taking those decisions, or taking those decisions because they're just what's best for you. So yeah, it's such a difficult thing to put into words, I guess, because it's so very internalized. Like, every single person's process is going to be different, and every single person's journey is going to be different, and you have to just acknowledge where you are now, and like try and, honestly, like, journaling is the best thing ever, because you can just, if you do it every single day, you'll notice patterns in yourself, and you'll notice, you'll see yourself improve, whether it's through your confidence, because you'll just be so much more aligned with whatever you're saying. I think that is where confidence comes down to, is that you want to get to a point where you are so authentically yourself and aligned with what you're saying that you don't think about what you're saying yes to, whether it's you're going to start a business, whether it's you're going to do anything. Because you know yourself, if someone says, like, if you go into starting a business, you've already got a certain level of confidence. You've obviously had that idea that feels aligned with you, and you're like, right, I'm just going to do this. And yes, it probably feels scary, but that's very different to not feeling confident. You will have had that level of confidence where you believe in yourself enough to go and start that business. Whether it like flops or anything, that's, you know, you'll learn along the way. But that is where the confidence is. And it's as simple as like someone asking, do you want a tea or a coffee? You know, if you're a tea or a coffee person, or you know, if you want a tea or coffee in that moment, you just say yes, you don't think about it. And that's, I think, essentially what confidence comes down to, is where you're just so aligned with yourself that you don't have those moments where you're doubting, and where doubt starts to creep in, where you're just like, yeah, cool, let's go for it. And that's essentially what you're trying to build. And it's not easy to do, but that's kind of the goal, I guess, is where you just want to be able to know that you're trusting your own decisions. whether it's business, whether it's relationships, whether it's personal, you just trust
Gosh.
yourself enough. Yeah.
Yeah, and I think that's a really good way of putting it, like trusting your decisions. That's the kind of good summary, I think, for what confidence is and how we can live it as well. So I guess with that in mind, do you think in the next sort of 5-10 years that we're getting towards a future where particularly young people, but people more generally, are becoming more or less confident? And do you think it's going to be expressed in different ways throughout that time period as well?
I think, unfortunately, social media has had an impact on people's level of confidence, maybe, but again, because we're looking externally. I would hope that the next generation coming through, like I have a younger sibling and he is so much more confident than I was at that age. And I look at him and I'm like, I don't understand how you're like 15 and you're literally just like such a badass. And I was 15 and was like completely clueless, and stumbling over my words and not really sure what I was doing. But he's always been quite an introvert. So he spent most of his 15 years being with himself. And I think that's what I've realized now, is that you have to actually just take that time to be with yourself. Whereas I was very extroverted in school, which is why when you talked before about extroversion, introversion, I know from my own personal experience, I was like really loud and like a bit bolshy in school. But then I wouldn't public speak. So it was like a really weird, if I was in a group of people, but then put me on a stage and I was completely like frozen up, couldn't do it. So comparing me and my family, like I was really extroverted, and it's taken me like 25 years to get to that point where I've actually spent that time with myself and got to know myself. And I would say I'm a lot more confident. My brother was confident from an earlier age because he was very introverted and didn't like really genuinely enjoyed being by himself. So got to know himself, so was very confident in every decision he made. So I think that's the key to it. And I'm not advocating us all sitting in on our own all the time, because obviously we've seen that that's not good. But I definitely think you should factor in some time to just be silent and be with yourself. And the reason I think maybe we're not seeing that as much is social media, and it is because we've got all this consumption, like we're having so many different businesses and the news and everything constantly thrown at us through media, that we don't really get as much time to sit with ourselves and sit in silence, and maybe not get as much time, but it's not maybe as normalized to do that, because we're expected to constantly be on the go and constantly achieve. And actually having those moments every day where, whether it's half an hour or an hour, where you switch your phone off, you don't engage with anything else, you just go out and go for a walk, or you sit in silence, they're so important. So I'm hoping that that's what's going to happen with the next generation. But I do think they've got a real challenge having to fight against that external noise from social media, from like TV and everything like that. So yeah, it's a tricky one. I feel sorry for them. It's a hard one.
No, yeah, and I think it's really going to impact the way we work with one another too, you know, in the sense of how freely, you mentioned, we are aligned with ourselves, in the sense of what that means, how we show up at work, how we show up in a collaborative project in a team, what that means with how we can actually work and bring one another together through that confidence, because confidence is often the catalyst for those things to actually move forward or progress. And so I do agree, there is that kind of crisis of confidence potentially on the periphery of the next kind of 5-10 years. But the flip side is actually that it is there, and it is then the permission to have that increase in confidence allowed to then create something, you know. So many young people have confidence in their abilities in the workplace because they've started a side hustle, or they've started a small thing for themselves outside of school, because they haven't needed school to teach them the thing, because the internet exists. And it's the first kind of couple of generations now that are starting to see that come to fruition, whereby they have developed skills for work before getting to work. And it's going to be interesting to see how the workplace as a whole kind of reacts to that change of skill in a way, because often we kind of harp on about skills gaps, but then there's probably also a lot of tacit skills that people already have and are confident in, that they don't necessarily, or they might not be allowed to show off from the start of being in their career. So yeah, it's going to be super interesting to see all this come to play out over the next years to come. But Katie, thank you so much for jumping on. Really excited to have had you on today. We chatted a lot of things: confidence, business building, entrepreneurship, and a bit about your journey in that as well. I hope you've had a good time.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me on. It's been really good to actually chat to you all about this. So hopefully it's made some people think, and hopefully you've had
definitely. No, definitely have. And of course, people can connect with you personally on LinkedIn, but also on notyourbabecollective.co.uk. That's where people can find you. And yeah, thank you very much for listening in. We'll see you in the next one.